Lesson 38, Accent Markings. In this particular lesson, we want to introduce you to a big deal in ancient Greek, and that is the idea of marking what syllable gets the accent. So we have a certain set of special markings called accents, or we could call them accent marks. And these special markings indicate what syllable of a word gets the accent. Now, how we got these accents is kind of a long story, and the usage of them has changed over time. So there's a couple of things to think about here. First, we have the historical use of accents, but then we have the idea of what these accents actually mean to you as a Greek student. And so what we really want to talk about here mostly is the manner in which Greek teachers teach this kind of thing to students. We have a kind of a standardized way of representing these accents as far as their pronunciation so that students can absorb this material and understand what's happening with accents. This topic can be very complicated. And in fact, Catherine, you and I have talked about this several times, how many ancient Greek textbooks start out with a very long and complicated discussion of accents. Oftentimes they'll put it as the very first thing in the book, right after the alphabet. And
yes, even before lesson 1.
Right. And in my opinion, that can be just really confusing and overwhelming for the students, especially if you're just teaching yourself and you don't have a teacher. So in this textbook, I have tried to arrange the material in such a way that I don't overwhelm the reader with information about accents.
Yeah, and that, I think, has been helpful in terms of making this textbook, because as a Greek student, when I was first learning, the accents were completely overwhelming and I did not know what to do, and it took me a very long time to learn all the rules. So it can be discouraging if all of the rules are kind of poured on the student all at once.
And also, to add to that, that's a big reason why I've made all the pronunciation recordings that go along with this book, so that the person reading the book can listen to those recordings and actually hear the different pronunciation patterns of the Greek language. You know, there's a certain musical quality to the way Greek sounds, and to me, you just need recordings to fully represent that.
Absolutely.
And so speaking of a musical quality, as I say here in Lesson 38, ancient Greek accents started out as pitch accents. And what we mean by pitch accents is that the pitch of the voice, as if you're singing a song, the pitch of the voice would go up or down. And so there was a guy named Aristophanes of Byzantium who worked at the library in Alexandria, Egypt. And according to tradition, he developed these accents that we use today to indicate when your voice was supposed to go up and when it was supposed to go down. So that's why we have these 3 different accents.
So the one on the left is called an acute, and originally it meant that the tone of the voice went up. Now it just means that the syllable gets an extra oomph. It's just stressed.
Oh, it's so cute.
Aww.
Oh, you said acute, not cute.
Yes. And then the next one is called a grave. It goes down, and originally it meant that the voice pitch went down. Now, just like the acute, it's a stress marker. And then the one on the far right is called a circumflex. And it's represented in 2 ways. It's either that upside down smile, or it looks like a tilde in some fonts. It depends on the font that the textbook or person typing is using. In that case, it used to indicate that the pitch went up and then down again. Now it's again indicating stress, but also indicating that that vowel is treated as long.
Right, Catherine. There are 2 ways to write the circumflex. That's the one on the far right. I personally prefer the one that looks like an upside down smile or a frown. But yes, very often you'll see the tilde one. In this particular book, I've used the frowny looking one just because that's the one I personally prefer.
I also prefer it. I've seen most of my students prefer it as well. It's easier to look at.
But if you happen to see the one that looks like a tilde, it's just the exact same thing. It's just written a different way. It's two markings that mean the exact same thing. They're both the circumflex. And according to what I was told, the circumflex started out as an acute and a grave put together, like a little pointy thing. And so over time it got curved.
That would make sense.
Because it was going up and down, you see?
Exactly. And if our listeners are familiar with tonal languages like Mandarin, this will be a familiar concept for them. But that's not the way that we tend to use these now to represent pitch. Instead, we use them to represent stress.
Although I would argue that when you make a stress accent on a word, the voice does go up a little bit naturally.
True.
For example, if I say the word potato, the accent is on the second syllable, potato.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm giving that more emphasis, potato. But in addition to giving it more emphasis, also the pitch of my voice is going up slightly. Potato, potato. That's a pretty good rise of pitch from the first syllable to the second syllable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you slow it down and sing it, potato, you can really hear the pitch going up.
True.
So I would argue that even though today we use stress accent in English, you get a little bit of pitch accent along with it as a bonus. The pitch of your voice goes up as you give additional emphasis to the stressed syllable.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, I tend to not see so much of a big difference between pitch accent and stress accent. And this is, again, just my personal view. I see them as a little bit closer than often is represented. I see them as kind of not as far away from each other. They have a lot in common, in other words.
Yeah, and people using the mostly stress system can still have that little bit of pitch, not just in the acute, but also in the circumflex. There is the ability to go a little bit up and a little bit down if you hold the vowel for long enough.
And I actually do that quite a bit in my own personal study, because if I do that, it helps me remember that the accent there is a circumflex.
Yeah, I do that too.
So I kind of sing it. If there's a word with a circumflex, I'll go, whoa, to just help myself remember that it's a circumflex there. It's like...
So do I.
Bill sings the hits, my greatest hits and misses. So the big point we want you to understand in this lesson is that originally accent in the ancient Greek language was done with the pitch of the voice. Over time, it turned into a stress accent, where you accent a syllable by giving that syllable additional emphasis. But the accents that we have to represent that are left over from when it was a pitch accent. So we have accent markings that are designed to indicate pitch accent, but they no longer really represent pitch accent. We just sort of have them as leftovers. Some teachers like to emphasize the pitch change for these accents. Some teachers don't.
Mm-hmm.
Some teachers don't care. And so really we're just telling you all this stuff for your awareness, just so you can know what it is you're working with here. So these are accent markings designed to show pitch accent, but today indicate a stress accent. That's really the basic takeaway that I'd like you to get from this lesson. So Catherine, in this lesson, we have our first real Greek word, isn't that right? Maybe we had one.
Yes.
Maybe we had one Greek word in a previous lesson, but this is the first one they're actually going to use in the book in sentences. Why don't you take us through the pronunciation of it and show us how that accent at the end is going to sound?
So this word is Georgos, and the accent there is on that last syllable, the omicron in os. And you notice that means that I went Georgos. The stress is on that last syllable. And it's also that, as you said, Bill, my pitch went up just a tiny bit.
Yeah, I heard that.
Because of the way I was reading it.
Yes, I heard the pitch of your voice go up a little bit, which I think is just a natural thing.
Mm-hmm. And also, since we have an omicron and an omega in the same word, the omega gets held for a little longer and the omicron doesn't.
That's a good point. So, in fact, let's take them through those vowels. We have a total of 3 vowels. We have an epsilon followed by an omega, and that's not a diphthong. They don't work as one unit. Those are 2 separate vowel sounds, right?
Right. So they have to be pronounced separately. So ge, o, and then ro is right after the omega, so it becomes geor, gos.
Right. The gamma starts a new syllable, so it's ge, or, gos, if we wanted to slow it down.
Exactly.
So let's see if I can say it with the omega taking twice the duration of the epsilon, right? Because epsilon is always short, as we've been telling them this whole time, and omega is always long.
Right.
And so that rule of thumb is to pronounce long vowels with twice the duration of a short vowel. So if I were to do that, it might sound something like this. Georgos.
Yeah.
So the way I pronounced it might not be perfect. Other Greek teachers might pronounce it a different way, but that's pretty close, and it's what we're trying to teach you in this book. We're talking about vowel length, we're talking about accents, and so georgos is a general idea of how that word ought to sound.
And the listeners will be playing around with it and experimenting with it, and sometimes it'll come out funny, and that's perfectly fine. That's part of the learning process. The main thing is that as a listener, you're opening your mouth, you're making the sounds yourself, you're listening to the pronunciation recordings as we go forward, and that involvement with the language is really getting going.
Exactly. And as I always say, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't view ancient Greek as it's inside some kind of display case. Don't be afraid to jump in there, experiment with it, play with it, and really get your hands dirty working with the language. And if you do that, it will really pay off in your studies.